What do these books that tell us about how to read the Bible and how to read the world, creation, evolution, and how to understand the story of Adam and Eve tell us? I already tried to explain, and I repeated myself several times, about the differences between the myth, the fiction, the lie, the true and exact, true but not exact, metaphor, and that the Bible speaks to us in a mythological fashion in the first 11 chapters before the story of Abraham, where clearer type history, albeit verbally transmitted history, until Moses came 800 years after Abraham to write the story of Abraham, and whatever Abraham and his descendants have brought as understood history or mythology of how the world came to be, and how Moses took all this and through the inspiration of God he started to write what we have received in the Bible, which tells us the relationship of God, man, and our salvation, rather than being a book of history or a book of science. And as we said, we shouldn't judge the scriptures by science, nor science by scriptures, and those who try to find scientific phenomena in the Bible are just doing a big mistake, because by this you are telling people, look, it is written in Isaiah that a God who was sitting on the sphere of the world, therefore the Bible writer of that chapter must have understood, or by revelation he understood, that it is a globe and not a flat earth. Well, if you start to say things like that, you are exactly putting the Bible under the microscope and inviting all scientists, believers or atheists, to come and look through the microscope and criticize the Bible on scientific materialistic basis. You are disgracing the Bible and science both at the same time. You are no different from those atheist scientists who tries to say, because we understand all the how, A became B, became C, became D, therefore we don't need to ask the question why and just leave it. And that is again a very limited, narrow-minded way of looking. We have to try to open our mind and study the how in science and try to study the why in the Bible, and not to mix them, please. 1,000 years before Moses, there were 2,300 before Christ, which means that about 1,000 years before Moses. We have here with us some very important documents of what we call the myth of Gilgamesh, or the epic of Gilgamesh, and the epic of Atrahasis. These are very interesting pieces of literature 1,000 years before Moses, and they use lots of the building bricks of the elements that Moses used in writing. I'm talking here about the frame, not the inspired, real, precious content in the story. Try to be very clear. We are not saying that the Bible is a myth in the sense that it is fiction or lie, and it is not fiction and it is not lie, and we say that it is a mythological style in which the first 11 chapters are written. I don't want anybody to try to misquote this, and be honest yourself. The myth here means a reality in a metaphorical way that describes very true things, but not in a scientific or a true scientific historical manner as we understand it now. And I hope I've repeated myself in this point many times. Now, there is also another story about the creation called Enoma Elish, and that is from around the time of Moses, and it is 1,150 years before Christ. What do these tell us? Apart from the frame, which is similar to the frame of the biblical narrative of the story of Genesis, they speak about gods who are fighting together, and that nature was divine and everything was God in a sense, but in a material way, and that the gods created mankind to serve the gods, and there was no love relationship between mankind and the gods. But these gods created mankind from soil mixed with, say, the blood of gods. So you can see here now the similarities and the big differences regarding the frame and the content of the frame, or the mold and the precious material that we are putting in that mold. It tells us here that there were two narratives to the story of the creation. The first one is known as the Yahwistic, from the word Yahweh, Jehovah, and they give it the symbol big J from Jehovah. Yahweh is the name in Hebrew of God. Yahweh, which became in English Jehovah, which means I am who I am who exists. Because God was used in that narrative, which comes from the second half of the second verse, second half of the fourth, from the second chapter, the second half of the fourth verse starts that Yahwistic description of the creation. But the first chapter and until the first half of the fourth verse of the second chapter of Genesis, the story relates to what is known as the Priester Codex document, or codex, or writing, whatever you want to call it. I don't know how to translate that from Arabic. And this Priester Codex tells us the story in a slightly different version, and that's why scholars think there are two stories bound together in one story, because in the first story the earth was an island in the middle of a sea, and the 7 days of the week were very respected. Everything was created, and then man came later. In the second chapter, the main story of the Yahwistic or the Jehovistic Codex speak of man being created first, then God, man being mankind, the generic man. Adam means soil, as I said, Mr. Soil, but it was not used as man in the sense of Adam as a person, but Adam as a generic term for mankind. The mankind was created first. Then God found that man was not happy alone, so he created all animals and brought them to man. But even after he gave them all names, God still saw, and that's a very important statement, that it is not good for that man to be alone, whether man, you can take it as male or female. It's not good to be alone, so I will create a helper comparable to him. And then he put this man into sleep, and from his rib he created Eve. And when he saw Eve, now he didn't just give her a name, but, and by the way, the word Eve here as well is the mother of being. It is not an individual personal name. Adam started to recognize, she's flesh of my flesh and bone of my bones, and God saw that this was very good. In other words, the perfection came by creating Eve. So the way was, God did not have any plans or anything in the beginning of chapter 2, because he had not yet reigned on the earth, but everything was made around the time when he was making Adam, according to the narrative of the second chapter story. Then after Adam, he created all animals to befriend Adam, but they didn't provide this friendship with Adam, so he created Eve. And the story in the second chapter has very radical basis, different from the first one, although they've been amalgamated together. In the second story, in the second chapter, it is actually the Garden of Eden was an oasis in the middle of a desert. But in the first story, it was an island in the middle of a sea. Go read them accurately and you will understand what I mean by these points. Of course, when mankind was created in the image of God, it doesn't say that it is that God has a physical body. But the best interpretations we have in the history of the church is that we were created in the image of what Christ, the incarnated Son of God, would be. Or other interpretations that the image of God means the idea that we have wisdom, we have freedom, we have all these high human qualities that make us human, not simply animals or plants. And then according to his likeness means the behavior. So this is the character of man. The first one is the constitution, that's the image of God in us, as I explained it. And then according to his likeness means the character and the behavior and the way we love and relate to one another and so on. All these are trials to explain the meaning of these symbolic words.